The fire devoured everything that night. I screamed for Delmar as smoke choked me, clawing at the flames to reach her crib. The heat was unbearable, but my desperation was stronger. My baby was in there. I had to save her. But when the firemen pulled me back, I knew it was over. Later, they told me no remains were found, just ashes and ruins. They said the fire had taken everything. But deep inside, I felt something wasn't right. They called it grief. They said I needed to let go, but a mother knows. Even as I stood over her empty grave, I felt her heartbeat somewhere out there, faint but alive. For 6 years, I carried that pain in silence. Night after night, I woke up gasping, hearing her cries in my dreams. People told me I was crazy, that I was holding on to nothing, but they didn't hear the whispers in my heart. Then came the party. I didn't want to go. Crowds made my chest tighten, but my cousin insisted.
"It'll be good for you,"
she said. The house was alive with music, laughter, and children running around. I stayed in the corner, trying to disappear. That's when I saw her. She stood by the balloons, her curls bouncing with each step. She laughed, a sound so familiar it stopped my breath. My vision blurred as I focused on her face, those dimples, her dimples.
"No,"
I whispered, clutching the table for support. My hands shook, my pulse thundered in my ears. It couldn't be. I moved closer, pretending to fix my drink, but my eyes never left her. She tilted her head and smiled at another child. That tilt, so uniquely hers. My mind screamed, "It's here." But how? I couldn't just grab her. People would think I'd lost my mind. She was with a woman, Carolyn Correa. The name sent a chill through me. Carolyn had visited my house once before the fire. She was introducing the girl as her daughter, Alaya. My stomach twisted as I pieced it together. I had to be sure. I approached them slowly, forcing a smile.
"Hi, sweetheart,"
I told the girl, kneeling down. She looked up at me with wide eyes, innocent and curious. My hands trembled as I reached out.
"Your bow's loose,"
I said, pretending to fix it. In one quick motion, I tugged a strand of hair and tucked it into my pocket. I walked away on unsteady legs, my heart pounding like a drum. The wait for the DNA results was unbearable. Each second felt like an eternity. I barely ate and barely slept. What if I was wrong? But when the call came, the detective's voice shattered my doubts. "It's a match. She's your daughter." My knees gave out, tears streaming down my face. Delmar was alive. But the truth was a horror I wasn't prepared for. Carolyn had stole her that night. She'd taken Delmar from her crib, set the fire to erase her tracks, and raised her as her own for 6 years. I sat across from Carolyn in court, my hands shaking with rage. She showed no remorse, no regret. Her voice was cold, almost smug, as she made her final claim. Pedro, my ex, had given her Delmar willingly. My heart stopped. Pedro? The man who'd held me as I cried? The father who mourned with me? Could he have betrayed me? The police found no evidence to support her accusation, and Pedro was never charged. But her words lingered, poisoning every memory I had of him. The day I was reunited with Delmar should have been the happiest of my life, but she didn't recognize me. She clung to Carolyn, crying for the woman who had stolen her from me. I sang to her and told her stories of the life she once had. Slowly, she began to trust me, her tiny hand reaching for mine, but the scars ran deep, for both of us. Even now, years later, I wake up at night, drenched in sweat. I hear the crackle of flames, the sound of Carolyn's voice, and the hollow laughter of the party where I found my daughter. This isn't just a story of loss. It's a story of survival, of fire and lies, of a mother's love that never dies. They told me my daughter was dead, but I always knew. A mother always does. Luzaida Cuevas was told her newborn died in a fire. 6 years later, at a party, she spots a girl with familiar dimples and takes a lock of hair. DNA tests confirm it is her daughter, Delmar. The kidnapper, Carolyn Correa, a cousin by marriage of Delmar's father, Pedro Vera, had abducted the baby and set the fire to cover her tracks. Correa then raised the girl as her own, naming her Alaya Hernandez. Another shocking twist came when Correa claimed Pedro had given her the child, an accusation he always had denied and was never charged for. I was playing outside when he waved me over. "Hey, Emily, want to see something cool?" I didn't hesitate. I'd seen him around, always by himself, my 7-year-old neighbor, Nathaniel. So I skipped across the yard and followed him up to his front door. He was standing there with a smile, picking at his scabs until they bled, then proceeded to suck on the blood from the wound. Yeah, kids can be weird, but I was only 5-year-old to pick up on the signs. "I got a Ouija board for my birthday," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "It tells the future. Want to try it?" I didn't know what a Ouija board was, but the idea of seeing the future sounded exciting. He led me to the basement, the stairs creaking under our weight. The air got colder with each step. My small feet felt heavy as if the house didn't want me there. When we reached the basement, he flicked on the light. It flicked, barely lighting up the room. I didn't like it. I wanted to go home. "Just wait," he said, pushing me farther into the dark room. "It'll be fun." But it wasn't fun. It wasn't fun at all. The moment I turned around, I felt his hands on my throat. Cold fingers gripped my neck and I couldn't breathe. My heart raced, panic flooding my body. I kicked and scratched, trying to pull his hands off, but he was so much stronger than me. His breath was hot on my ear as he whispered, "I'm gonna make you disappear." His fingernails dug into my skin, squeezing tighter. The blood from his scabs felt slimy and sticky on my skin. He started running his hands roughly all over my body, pulling my dress and digging and scratching with his nails on my arms. The darkness around me seemed to grow deeper. My world was spinning, my head dizzy, as I gasped for air that wasn't there. Then, just as my vision started to fade, I heard something soft, a scream of a woman.
"Nathan, stop! You're hurting her!"
It was Nathaniel's mother. She came crashing through the door, her face a blur of panic. She pulled me away from him with a strength I didn't know she had. The pressure on my throat lifted, but my body was shaking, my chest heaving for breath. I could barely see, barely understand what had just happened. I ran out of that house. I didn't know what I had just escaped, but one thing was clear. Nathaniel wasn't just a weird kid. He was growing up to be something far sinister. I never told anyone, not my parents, not the police. I couldn't. I didn't understand what was happening, what he had done to me. But as I grew older, the memories came back, sharper, darker. Time went by and I was in my teens when I overheard my mom talking on the phone. The words,
Nathaniel Barjona.
Hit me like a slap in the face.
He's been arrested for kidnapping and worse.
She said.
They found body parts in his freezer.
My stomach twisted. I remembered that night, his cold fingers, the dark basement, the eerie smile. It all clicked. But that wasn't the worst part. As I dug deeper, I uncovered more horrifying details. He had been serving meat at his cookouts, deer burgers, venison spaghetti, meat pies, but the neighbors didn't know where it came from. They thought it was from animals he'd hunted. They were wrong. What they didn't know was that Nathaniel Barjona had been using his cookouts to feed the bodies of children he had murdered. He would butcher them, sometimes while they were still alive, and serve their flesh disguised as venison. He would cut their limbs off, the fresh blood dripping onto the floor as he prepared his special meals. Some of the neighbors complained about the odd taste, but he always brushed it off with a chuckle, saying it was just a wild game. The authorities had found remains in his freezer. The head of one child, a little boy, had been preserved in a jar. His hands had been skinned and left in the sink. The worst part? Nathaniel had a collection of photographs, pictures of children he'd taken before he killed them, hanging in the basement, a twisted trophy wall. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't stop thinking about the kids he'd murdered. I had been so close to being one of them. The thought of him preparing that meal, using pieces of their bodies, made my stomach turn. And then it hit me. I was almost his next victim. The truth was worse than I ever imagined. Nathaniel Bar Jonah had tried to kill me, but I survived. Parents should keep close eye on their children from a very young age. According to the FBI serial killing profile, almost 70% of serial killers show early signs of disturbed behavior from a very young age. To this day, when I close my eyes, I see his face, those cold eyes, the twisted grin, and I hear his voice whispering in the dark, "You're next." Nathaniel Bar Jonah was a convicted American child predator and cannibal. He was linked to the 1996 disappearance of 10-year-old Zachary Ramsey, though charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence. Bar Jonah had a long history of evading harsher sentences, often due to legal loopholes or psychiatric evaluations. In Bar Jonah's apartment, detectives also found a number of recipes using children's body parts with titles such as Little Boy Pot Pie, French Fried Kid, and phrases such as lunch is served on the patio with roasted child and barbecue be some young guy. In the decoded journals, Bar Jonah also referenced serving these recipes to neighbors. During a search at one of Bar Jonah's previous residences in Great Falls, authorities dug up portions of the garage and sifted through nearly 2 tons of dirt, in which they found 21 fragments of human bones. Although it was eventually determined that the bones were those of an unidentified African-American child, a boy believed to be between the ages of 8 and 13. He was later sentenced to 130 years in prison, without the possibility of parole, where he died due to health issues. Landing an internship at Murdaugh & Sons, one of South Carolina's most prestigious law firms, was a dream come true for me. Alex Murdaugh, the towering figure at its helm, was the epitome of charisma. He had a way of locking eyes with you, his wide grin radiating confidence, making you feel like the most important person in the room. To the world, Alex was a pillar of the community. To me, he was a mentor, a legend. June 7th, 2021 began like any other sultry evening in South Carolina. The air was thick, humming with cicadas, and the faint scent of magnolia blossoms wafted through the windows of the Murdaugh estate. That night, Alex left the office abruptly. He'd been distracted all day, pacing the length of his office, his brow furrowed. "Family stuff," he murmured, before vanishing into the humid dusk. Hours later, the news broke like a lightning strike in the quiet night. Maggie and Paul Murdaugh, his wife and youngest son, were dead, murdered. The details were grotesque, the kind that made your blood run cold. Paul had been shot twice at close range with a shotgun. His chest was shredded and his face... God, his face. The blast had left it mangled, barely recognizable. Maggie's body was found several yards away, sprawled on the grass near the dog kennels. She had been shot multiple times with a rifle, her back ripped open by the bullets as she tried to flee. Blood pooled beneath her, glinting black under the floodlights of the estate. When Alex came to the office the next morning, he looked like a man crushed by grief. His suit hung loosely on his frame, and his hair disheveled. He clutched a framed photo of his family, his hands trembling as tears streamed down his face. "They're gone," he whispered, his voice raw and broken. It was impossible not to feel pity for him. How could someone so powerful, so revered, endure such loss? But even as I watched him, something felt off. His sobs seemed too calculated, his gaze darting around the room like he was gauging our reactions. The days that followed were a slow descent into darkness. Whispers began swirling around the office. Questions about Alex's whereabouts the night of the murders, rumors of financial troubles. Late one evening, while organizing case files, I stumbled upon a ledger hidden in a stack of old documents. My stomach dropped as I scanned the pages. Numbers don't lie. Alex had been embezzling money. Millions. My heart raced as I pieced it together. Client settlements had vanished into thin air, funneling into accounts that led nowhere. Then came the night I overheard him on the phone. I was working late when his voice, sharp and low, filtered through the thin office walls. "It's falling apart," he hissed. "They're closing in. We need to act fast." His tone was cold, devoid of warmth he used to charm everyone around him. It was then that I knew Alex Murdaugh wasn't just a grieving father and husband. He was hiding something terrible. When the trial began in early 2023, the world saw the true face of Alex Murdaugh. The prosecution unraveled his carefully constructed image, exposing him as a man drowning in debt, desperate to cover his tracks, and the ultimate horror, to protect his empire, he had murdered his own wife and son. The courtroom was a battlefield of evidence and emotion. Ballistic reports revealed that the weapon used in the murders were owned by the Murdaugh family. Phone records showed Alex's voice on a video recorded by Paul minutes before the killings, contradicting his claims that he wasn't at the estate that night. The narrative painted by the prosecution was chilling. That night, Paul confronted Alex about the missing money. The argument escalated into fury. In a blind panic, Alex grabbed a shotgun. The first blast ripped through Paul's chest, knocking him backward. The second obliterated his head, the spray of blood and bones splattering the kennels. Maggie, hearing the shots, ran toward the chaos. Her footsteps left faint imprints in the damp grass, a trail that led to her execution. She barely had time to scream before Alex turned the rifle on her. The first shot tore through her back. She stumbled, gasping, trying to crawl away, but the next shot silenced her forever. I sat in the gallery, frozen, as the crime scene photos flashed on the screen. The bodies, the blood-soaked grass, the shell casings. It was like staring into a nightmare. When Alex took the stand, he cried, his voice trembling as he professed his innocence. "I loved my family," he said, tears streaming down his face. But his tears felt hollow, his words rehearsed. The Murdaugh murder case revolves around Alex Murdaugh, a prominent South Carolina attorney accused of orchestrating the deaths of his wife Maggie and son Paul in June 2021 at the family's estate. Paul had been facing charges for a fatal 2019 boating accident. Initially denying involvement, Alex later faced charges of murder in July 2022. Investigations revealed a web of financial crimes, drug addiction, and insurance fraud schemes tied to Murdaugh. In March 2023, he was convicted of the murders and sentenced to life without parole. The case exposed deep corruption and privilege with South Carolina's legal elite.